All right, so here's the deal. We've covered several systems, and by several systems, I mean exactly one, the endocrine system. Now we're going to talk about two systems in detail. We're going to talk about the circulatory system. We're going to talk about the digestive system. The goal of this part of the course is to get through the major systems of the body, and there are a bunch of them. We're probably not getting through all of them, so I just picked my favorites. And this is one of my favorites, gas exchange. We need to get gases into our body. We need to get gases out of our body. What gas do we really need to bring into our body that's super important? Oxygen. Why is oxygen so important? This does refer back to 101. It keeps us alive, but how? Oxidative phosphorylation. Oxidative phosphorylation. When does oxidative phosphorylation happen? During what? During cellular respiration. Where does it happen? What organelle? You guys are awesome, the mitochondria. Okay. So far, so good. We have to get these gases in. What is a waste product of cellular respiration? Carbon dioxide. We've got to get that carbon dioxide out. Every single one of your cells is respiring. Every single one of your cells has this oxidative phosphorylation going on, which means it needs oxygen and it needs to pump out carbon dioxide. Obviously, not all of your cells are up near your lungs where you're doing this gas exchange. So you have to move the gases from point A to point B. So we've learned about gas exchange in other animals. We've learned about diffusion across a flatworm. We've learned about the spiracles and insects taking in gases. But now we're going to really focus in on the human. The big picture is take oxygen in, get it to your cells. Your cells are going to use the oxygen, and they're going to remove carbon dioxide. That's got to happen before the carbon dioxide builds up to toxic levels. When that happens, oxidative phosphorylation stops because you're out of oxygen. You run out of ATP in your cells. I'm sorry, you run out of ATP very quickly. When the oxygen's gone, what do some of your cells do? That's right, they go to what's it called? Fermentation. Because they are facultative anaerobes, as Amber said. Well done. Your muscle cells, for instance, can switch over. But when they're doing that, they're building up waste products that also need to be expelled. Big thing is, if you're not breathing, that breathing helps regulate the levels of not just gas in your body, but other toxic byproducts. Here's how it works, basically, and then we're going to go into detail. Oxygen comes in and goes to your lungs. From your lungs, it goes to a carrier. That carrier in your body is the blood, red blood cells. The carrier transports that oxygen to the cells. The cell respires. When it does that, carbon dioxide is produced. That waste is transferred to the carrier through diffusion. The carrier moves back to the lung, and the lung expels it to the environment.
You said the carrier is the red blood cells?
Carriers the red blood cells. That's the big process. Basically, it's all about getting gases into your red blood cells. Now, what do you guys remember about diffusion and gases? Nothing. Got it. I'll tell you what you should remember about diffusion and gases. Gases will diffuse across a membrane as if there was no membrane present. It will go from a high concentration to a low concentration, and the membrane does not stop it. So, in the air around us, there is a lot of oxygen, right? You guys know that, but there's a lot of other stuff out there too. The air doesn't just have gases, it has other particles suspended in it. Microorganisms. You guys ever looked at a beam of sunlight and you saw all those little floating things? Yeah, you're breathing that. It's not just in a beam of sunlight. I know, right? We talked about this when we talked about fungus. Fungal spores, microorganisms. You've got all this stuff around you. Heck, mites can float along dust. You guys, I'm sure, have breathed in bugs by accident. That sucks, doesn't it? Think about a sneeze. This guy is slow motion. I'm sorry, obviously not slow motion. A still image, a super slow motion of a guy sneezing. And you could see particles suspended in the air. those particles can remain suspended in the air for up to 15 minutes.
That's kind of gross.
That's terribly gross when you think that 15 minutes earlier somebody could have been walking down the hall and sneezed, and you're breathing it. Right. Well, if you cover your mouth, that's different because you're hitting most of it on your arm. Do you assume that everybody covers their mouth when they sneeze? So it is on your arm, absolutely. No. You need to protect yourself from all of this crap. Guys, I know it's really phenomenal that there's stuff in the air that we're breathing that's isn't cool. It's mind-blowing the way the body's able to process this. Luckily, though, you have a nose. Your nose, you've looked up your nose at some point in your life. You've gone to a mirror. You've looked in there thinking, is there something hanging out of it? Yeah, you've done that, yes. Yes, what's your question? The question then is, does the size of your ears and your nose affect anything? And yes, it does. Your ears especially, the shape of your ears are going to funnel sound in, making it easier to hear. You said the nose and the ears. Oh, you said you didn't say ears? All right, so your nose, the shape of your nose absolutely has an impact because the shape of the nose, the form of the nose determines its function, right? The more twists and turns you have on the inside of your nose, the more you're able to catch. So we're going to talk about how all of your nose acts as a filter. The larger it is, the more nose hairs you have, the more filtration you can do.
When you say catch, you mean like breathe in air? More air you can take in?
No, I don't mean the more air you can take in. Literally, I mean, you guys have nose hairs, right? Yeah. You look at yourself in your mirror, you see all these nose hairs dangling down, you're like, really? In order to get into your lungs, air has to pass through those. They're acting like a filter. They're acting like a net. So they catch objects. They catch bugs. They catch mites. They catch pollen. All of these things are filtered out first by your nose hairs. So you take a deep breath using your nose. Was it in through the nose, out through the mouth, right? Yeah. And your nose hairs start catching them. This is my amazing drawing because I couldn't find any non-copyrighted stuff. But basically, this part over here, this is a nose. All right, there. Air goes in. You've got dangling hairs down at the edges. Those dangling hairs catch large particles, beetles, things like that. Look, if you've ever had a bug fly up your nose or try to, you're thankful that you have nose hairs. Not like I'm scarred by this or anything. Air comes in, and then you've got these twists and turns. Now, twists and turns do what? Increase surface area. Along those twists and turns, you've got places that will catch micro debris. So air comes in, it hits this and bounces down. Air comes in, it hits that one and bounces down. Good question. I have no idea what lizards have instead of nose hairs.
So when we sneeze, is that because
So lining the sinus cavity, so that top part, you're going to have a lot of mucus. You guys know that. You have to blow your nose like it's pollen season. You feel lots of stuff building up in your nose, right? When that happens, as that stuff gets into your nose, it's sort of knocked down and into mucus. The cells along your sinus cavity are producing this slimy substance. So now you've got it trapped in the mucus. That mucus is building up, and you need to get rid of it. So how do you get rid of mucus? Not trying to trick you. That's what you'd think, right? And we do when it gets too much, but what happens normally is that mucus gets pushed backwards. Now, you've probably seen some people doing this, nasal irrigation. Your mom does that? I would never do this. My mom tried so hard to convince me to do this. And after reading about brain-eating amoeba, I was just like, yeah, I'm not putting water anywhere near up my nose. That's sort of, it seems like, I don't know, a really horrible torture device. So that mucus is constantly being pushed to the back of the throat. It's being pushed backwards and backwards. When it gets to the back of the throat, this green circle is my mucus apparently, it's going to go down. And where's it heading? Down to your stomach for digestion, because this is your body's first form of defense. You trap it in mucus in your nose, and then you send it, that's packaged in mucus, and then you send it to the back. The net result of this is you breathe in through your nose, that air gets warmed up, it gets moisturized, it becomes very humid, and it's free of debris. So you've got nice, warm, clean air going down toward your lungs. From there, the air moves into the trachea. There's more mucus in your throat. Perhaps you've noticed that. You cough a lot sometimes. There's mucus in there building up. That mucus is trapping even more debris. As it traps it, it pushes it down. Hopefully that takes care of all the rest of the foreign particles. In your, going down your trachea, you've got an epiglottis. This epiglottis is going to open or close. It allows air into the lungs or mucus and food into the stomach. So this is sort of like a switch track. I wish, it's maybe when we're in lab, I'll have you look down each other's throats and see how this thing works. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Sorry, I don't have a, maybe I do have a model that does this. Maybe I don't need you. From there, the air is moving down to the lungs. As the surface area of the lungs increases, air is drawn in through the nose and into the lung. This is my obligatory healthy lung, smoking lung. So don't smoke. As you're breathing, you'll notice that your chest is moving in and out. That is not due to muscles. Your lungs are not expanding because of muscles in the lungs. Your lungs are expanding because the diaphragm pulls down. As the diaphragm pulls down, that sucks air into the lungs. When we were dissecting that pig, you had to cut through it or through everything. But you ended up having to cut through the diaphragm in order to see what was going on up top. As you're going to the lungs, the first branch you have are called the bronchi. Then it's going to go to the bronchioles and then the alveoli. So you've got several branches. Each time it branches, you're getting a smaller and smaller diameter, a smaller and smaller diameter piece of tissue. What that does is it increases the amounts of surface area relative to the interior area. You might have a really thick tube for the bronchi. As they get thinner for the bronchioles, now you've got more of it exposed. Then you go even thinner to the alveoli. So these are lots of these bulbs that increase surface area. The alveoli are key to this whole process because the alveoli are these little sacs. Air fills the sacs. Surrounding the alveoli are veins. And there's an artery leading away. So these little blood vessels have blood cells in them. That makes sense, right? The blood vessels are containing red blood cells are going to allow for diffusion. Inside the alveoli, to begin with, there's a super high concentration of oxygen, right? In the cells, there's a very high concentration of carbon dioxide. Now, this is critical. So the oxygen will diffuse from the alveoli directly across the membrane into the red blood cell, where there's a lower concentration. The carbon dioxide in a high concentration in the red blood cell will diffuse out of the red blood cell and into the alveoli. So you've brought in oxygen to the cells. That oxygen is getting replaced with carbon dioxide, which you will then exhale. That blood is not just red blood cells. It's a mixture of red blood cells and plasma and various other types of cells. There's other stuff in there. But we're really concerned about those red blood cells. Red blood cells are unnucleated. They have no nucleus, but they contain very high levels of the protein hemoglobin. Hemoglobin binds oxygen. It's like a little basket that carries oxygen molecules. So here's the basket shape. It holds it. These green points are the oxygen holding subunits, motifs. So the red blood cells take oxygen from the lungs and to the cells, and they take carbon dioxide from the cells to the lungs. Any questions so far? In your body, you produce roughly 2 million blood cells per second. I know. You are churning out red blood cells. They are produced from your bone marrow. So you can imagine people who have certain cancers where their bone marrow is destroyed cannot produce red blood cells efficiently. This leads to a lot of problems. But in a normal, healthy human, 2 million blood cells are produced per second. So these red blood cells that are produced at 2 million per second will live about 120 days. That's really good for an unnucleated cell that doesn't have instructions for how to build more stuff. But then they completely wear out and they're recycled within the spleen. So blood has to travel through these tubes. You are effectively a series of tubes. That's your body, meat plus a series of tubes. They move in some large tubes that are called arteries, and those are the ones that generally move away from the heart, or veins if they're moving to the heart. Now, there are 3 exceptions, and I don't need you to know those 3 exceptions for this class. Basically, what I want you to take away from this is arteries are moving from the heart, veins are moving to the heart. In between arteries and veins are capillaries. Capillaries are really, really thin tubes. So you come from these big, gigantic tubes of veins and arteries to much, much thinner tubes. And those thin tubes weave back and forth like a net. They're going to deliver blood to the cells trapped within the net. Without those capillaries, your cells would not be able to get oxygen. Because the capillaries are so much smaller, they're able to slow down the movement of the blood cells. Okay, so picture this in the body. You've got oxygen coming into your lungs. All around that oxygen, all the tissues have less oxygen than that high concentration you took in. Immediately, when they're in the alveoli, the oxygen diffuses out to the red blood cells. It's going very quickly. And of course, the red blood cells diffuse carbon dioxide back. Then the red blood cells move away. They grab the oxygen and they ran. But it's almost like carrying a leaking bucket. Because as the red blood cells are moving, they're still dropping off oxygen to the blood cells around, or to whatever's around them, because they have the highest concentration of oxygen. So it's a leaking bucket. How do you move water in a leaking bucket? What do you have to do? You have to patch it up. Okay, that's the best probably answer. Okay, my answer, let me go with what I would have thought because it makes more sense in this analogy. You have to move fast. You fill up the bucket and you run. You got a new bucket, you fix the bucket. Okay, you guys are problem solvers, I get it. You would absolutely have solved the issue. You work on a farm too, if that makes sense. You run fast with this bucket that's leaking water. Once you get to the capillaries, they get in and they are slowed down because of traffic, effectively. There's a lot of blood cells trying to get into a very small space. So they've got this bucket, and it's leaking out even more now. It's sort of like you've got that leaky bucket, and you have to stand still. Well, what happens, it keeps dripping until it's all emptied. So it empties out at the capillaries where it's delivering the oxygen to the blood cells. At the same time, the blood cells have a high concentration of carbon dioxide. They're leaking carbon dioxide, and the red blood cells right next to them have no carbon dioxide, so they suck it all up. They refill the bucket. And then they start moving again. They get out of the capillaries over to the veins, and in the veins, they're much bigger. They move faster. You guys have all been in traffic at some point. Have you ever gone from 4 lanes down to 1 lane? Yeah, right? Down like the POW height. So, yeah, because that's construction all the time. It slows down, and everybody comes to a stop. But then, almost immediately afterwards, where it opens back up to 4 lanes, you pick up speed like crazy. You try and make up for lost time, and you look out for police officers. That's what's happening here. You go from a 4 lane from the arteries down to a 1 lane, the capillaries, and then it opens back up to a 4 lane in the veins, getting back up to the lungs. The way they're able to move so efficiently is by using a muscle known as the heart. In case you didn't know, and I've had students who didn't know this, the heart's job is to pump blood through the body. I had no idea what they thought it did. The structure of the heart is there are 2 halves. And those 2 halves are subdivided into 2 chambers. One chamber receives the blood, the atrium. The other chamber gets it out, the ventricle. So blood enters through the atrium. Nobody's taken Latin in here, have you? Latin? No, okay, just maybe. Okay, so atrium, in a Roman house, the atrium is the entrance. Now you know. It's the important thing. Yes, I said Latin. So that doesn't help anybody, so you just have to know atrium, it comes in. I don't know, A is the first letter. The ventricle pushes blood out, and it pushes it using a significant amount of force. Exactly. The right side of the heart pumps blood carrying waste to the lungs. The left side of the heart pumps blood to the cells. Now, right and left in the heart are kind of tricky because doctors. Turns out, when you're looking at the heart, you would think you're sitting there looking at the heart, or you've got the heart in you. This is the left side, and this is the right side, right? Yeah, but no, that's not the way hearts are labeled. Because doctors don't think my heart, doctors think your heart. So when they're looking at the heart, they're like, oh, that's the left side, which is actually your right. It's like stage left and stage right. It's terrible. Doctors messed me up. Makes sense, thanks. These red blood cells are moving fast. Red blood cells move super fast. They can make a complete circuit of your body, from heart to lungs to heart to cells to the heart again in 60 seconds. They're passing through the heart twice in that loop.